me to understand what God has instituted. And regardless of the fact that many people may not want to start from, quote, God, today we're dealing with atheistic populations, we're dealing with people who are agnostic, we're dealing with people who claim no religious standing whatsoever. We have a plethora, again, of people who, again, don't want to start, you start with God, but the idea here is still the truth. And we should never be afraid of the truth. Yes, we have to find a way to converse about it, and we may not start necessarily, well, this is what God has done. I don't always start my conversations that way, but I do know it, and I don't fall away from it. I unambiguously teach it. This is very important. So when you look at what God has created, so let's look at husband. I know this little light is not on this very bright screen, doesn't show up. But if you look at what God instituted, so He created the human person, male and female. All right? Even Pope Francis has gotten into this great debate. And as I said last night, at 38,000 feet, when someone says to me, well, isn't it wonderful that Pope Francis is giving permission for same-sex people to be legitimized? I said, really? Where did that come from? It's not true at all. But this is what, again, they're hearing. They're seeing in social media. They're getting little snippets of information or things taken out of context that maybe the Holy Father is talking about, and so they pick what they want. But in reality, the Holy Father even says that we can observe with our own eyes, male and female, He has made us. Very observable, all right? And so very, very practical, very, very easy to understand. And so when we look at the complementarity of man and woman, we know that woman is made for man and man is made for woman. And in this beautiful ends of marriage, the unitive and procreative, we know that these are harmonious. They are one and the same. And they speak very eloquently to the dignity of marriage, the dignity of the holy, sacred institution we call marriage. And again, it's marriage that is this single cell, all right, which becomes a family upon which our society is built. Last night and yesterday we were talking about the sanctuary of life, the family. So think about this. Pope Benedict talked about this. Where's the first government? It's in the family. The first school is in the family. The first hospital is in a family. The first place a child learns love, care, mercy, compassion, tenderness, and maybe even learns not so good things as well, sadly, but it's all in the family structure, all right? But this is where God has placed life. This is why it's the sanctuary of life. It's where God has placed this beautiful gift of this indissoluble, this beautiful exclusive union until death do them part. This is what God has instituted. And what's the challenge is how to help people to see this again. But look what happens. Because of the husband and wife, right? Because of their openness and generosity, because of their willingness to give and render to God what belongs to God, and because of their love and their care for each other, they in turn, now you see them as chains. Do not think of them as shackles, okay? They're links. I'm trying to show you that they're linked to each other. And the link produces not only the beautiful openness to children, but look how the links go. So her family becomes a link to him, linked to their children. His family becomes linked to him, to her, and the children. And of course, they're linked to God. So this is what God has established. This is what the family is. This is what marriage is. This is what children are to be raised in. And it's within this sanctuary, within this beautiful environment, and what in French we call this terroir. Terroir references to a grape. So if you look at a grapevine, everything that impacts that vine impacts the fruit that will happen on that vine. So the microbes in the ground, how much wind, how much sun, how much rain, or the lack thereof, everything impacts. The same thing here. And this is why the institution that God has created, this is the environment. This is where God wishes his children to be raised, to be formed, to be nurtured. And we know from environmental studies and many studies that what happens in many cases when a mother or a father are not together helping their children, forming their children, guiding their children, that they're sometimes allowing environmental things to impact their children. And what happens is a child, instead of being formed and guided, I'll give you an example. This is what I'm talking about. Recently, there was this case, and he's in the United States. She's a medical doctor, and she has sued, basically trying to take their a young child from the father. And what's happened is the mother, who really has some mental issues, but she believes that because her little boy, at the age of 2 or 3 at McDonald's, began to play with a little girl's toy that was in a Happy Meal, that all of a sudden that the little boy really thinks that he's a girl, and so she wants him to be a girl. This is the craziness that's going on. And so what happens is, instead of recognizing this is a child of 2 or 3, they have no earthly idea. And anyone who works with children knows that children at those ages play with many toys, many things. And matter of fact, you give a child a Christmas toy and it's in a box, they take the toy away and they play with the box. All right? So there's many things that occur. But the role of mom and dad, the role of husband and wife, is to nurture, to foster, to guide, to help the child to understand their own nature, who they are as male, as female, how they respond to each other, how they react toward each other, how they treat each other. All that is learned within that family structure. Okay? So I'm just trying to lay a little groundwork before we talk a little bit about the whole LBGT, the whole issue on the global scale, right? So, but look what happens when you introduce contraception, sterilization, when you introduce foreign bodies, right? You're introducing, in a way, a virus. That virus breaks the link between the procreative. It ruptures it. And then what happens? Divorce, adultery, pornography, the whole sexual perversion also breaks the unitive. And then what happens? Then explicit sex education, the value clarifications, which means the government and many what these sex perversion programs are doing. They're at Guatemala, for example. I was there giving a presentation to the bishops and the priests of Guatemala, and we showed them the textbooks that the young people are experiencing. And as early as 4 years old, they're teaching young boys and young girls, particularly young girls, how to use a condom. And they're giving them phallic symbols. They're giving them and playing games. So they'll put a table out and put, and I'm not trying to be too graphic, but I'm just saying they'll put different sizes out there. And what they do is, who can put the condom on the quickest? This is what they're doing. So they're introducing them to very perverse behaviors. This is why they take the children in the school systems. That's why they isolate the parent from the child. And the government says, well, that we're responsible for your children, which is not true. The child doesn't belong to the state. The child is the responsibility of mom and dad, the caregivers and caretakers and custodians, not the state. This is a problem. We saw this under communism. What the communists would do is isolate the parents from the child. That's why you saw Adolf Hitler, for example, created these youth clubs. He took them from the parents, he took them from the church, he took them from the institutions, and he began to form the minds. Remember what I said yesterday? He who controls the language controls the masses, right? So this is what we see. Then what we happen? Then you can see what assisted suicide, death with dignity. It ruptures the child from the parent. Then you see what happens. It ruptures us from God. So let's go back. What did God create? Oh, sorry. This is what God instituted. This is what happens. They're all individuals. No one's connected to anyone. And this is what happens when you break the links that bind us and unite us. You saw what the presentation was. Look what Dr. Finto said this morning. It's absolutely true. Loneliness. How many people I see. And I will tell you, many people living in these different lifestyles can tell you, they try to convince people of happiness and prosperity. And they may be very prosperous. They may be very, very wealthy. They may have great, big homes and nice cars and travel around the world. But they're very much alone. And when you work with people long enough, you see it and notice it. And this is the tragedy of our day, because we're not being honest with people. this is, there was a young man. I met him as you know, I fly quite a bit. I'm in an airport. I go to check in at the airport, and this young black man is dressed like a woman, got a wig, a huge bow for a tie, basically a bow. And when he looks up from his desk and sees me, he doesn't know how to respond to me, because immediately he's confronted with myself, a priest, a religious person, and so immediately he's trying to figure out how he's going to respond. But of course, I'm not going to do anything other than be respectful. But I'm thinking to myself, that old devil. Being respectful, but I'm thinking, how sad. Where's the friend? But you see, a real friend is someone who's willing to say to someone the truth. Where are the real friends? Where are the parents? Where are the grandparents? But you see, what's happened today is many families, because they don't know how to respond, just condone it, or even compliment it, even encourage it. So we have a real problem that we are walking into today. In the Philippines, for example, I have been to the Philippines 14 times. Right? It's probably the most visited country that I've been to out of my 83 countries that I have been. And I notice every time I go, more and more transgender, more and more. Prostitution is unbelievable. It's, matter of fact, I'll tell you a funny story. When I was last there in October, I was in this hotel, and, again, it's very tragic what you see what's going on. I get in the elevator with these older men with 3 young women. These are prostitutes, all right? And they get in the elevator with me, which they regretted because the elevator got stuck. And next thing you know, we're in there for the next half hour. They don't know what to say. The older gentleman has put himself in a corner, saying nothing. And I said, okay. And I told him, I said, what are you all doing? And I just go at it. And, and so they were so grateful when the doors finally opened. But the reality is, where is this truth? How do we help? I'm not being mean to them in any way. I'm just saying, what a shame that you feel that you have to do this. We've lost a sense of that sensibility of the dignity and the beauty of the human person. That's the core issue here. It's the fundamental issue. And that's the starting point. The starting point is not their situation. The starting point is not where things are. The starting point is, what is the objective truth? That's our starting point. Then we can go into the conversation. Then we can deal with them where they are, like the woman at the well. Yes, we start where things are. But we have to make sure that we are articulate. We have to make sure that we are very comfortable in that teaching. Otherwise, we will be gobbled up by the vultures. Right? And that's why if you went to the university in Canada, to Toronto and Quebec, this is a video. I wish it was too long to show you. But it goes on the university, so it's a white, very white European man, reporter, goes to the university and says, what do you think about the genderless bathrooms? Now, let's stop for a moment. I've traveled a lot. There are a lot of places where there's no male or female on the door. All right. Matter of fact, I had one pilgrimage I did to Italy almost 30 years ago. I had a bunch of ladies who had never been outside the United States, and when we went to this auto stop to stop for fuel and things like this, the bathrooms, everyone goes in the same bathroom. All right. So, but the idea here is one side inside the same room, or where the women go, and the men are over here. Now these are all closed doors, but you can see legs, you can see feet. And one of the old ladies says, this is the first time I've been to the bathroom with a priest. But the idea here is, but we know that, again, we know the idea that why the separation is there. But the reality is what happened is they went to the university and said, well, what do you think? And almost every student repeated what they hear in social media. I think it's a wonderful thing. I don't think we should distinguish between things. I don't think it's any problem. So then the reporter took it further. Well, tell me, what do you think about if I tell you that I am a 6-foot tall African woman? What do you think about that? And goes around, well, I think you can be whatever you want to be. You can do whatever you want. And some just got a little stumbled in their conversation. So finally, he got to the end of this, about an hour of interviews. And he walks up to them and says, I am a 7-year-old African little girl. Now, he's as white as me, if not whiter. Blue-eyed, blonde hair, all right? And they had a hard time with that. Eventually, you brought them to a point where their eyes are looking at a 6-foot-tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed European man who thinks that he's a 7-year-old black African girl. Something doesn't right. And you watch them stumble over their words. Because eventually, each person, no matter how progressive they may be, gets to a point where something draws them to a close. All right? So we have to realize that that's why we always start with that objective truth. So this is what I want you to see, because what's happened in our culture today, God bless you, is the individuality, this whole understanding that each of us in this room are unique. Each of us in this room is irrepeatable. There will never, ever be another you ever, 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 ever again. You are irrepeatable. But we are made for community. We are made for family. This is what God has made us for. He's made us for himself. We're not made to be isolated from each other, broken links. We're made to be linked to each other. This is very important as we have this conversation. Okay? That makes sense? You sure? Really sure? Yes. All right. Right. So let's talk about what I'm seeing on the global scale. Now, as I said, in most Western cultures, so let's define Western culture. Western culture would be what we speak about usually of North America. We think of many countries within Europe as itself. We think of Australia, New Zealand, Japan. We think of some countries in the Asia community, Vietnam, Korea, which oftentimes people speak about as the developed nations. I don't like that terminology for many reasons. Part of it is I think that what they mean by developed, I would maybe call undeveloped. All right? Mother Teresa of Calcutta spoke about the United States when she gave a presentation to the United Nations, said, you might be very rich, but you're very poor. And this is very true. So, but when we look at that Western culture is imposing a value. Now, this is the modern day colonialism. Now, you all, especially from here in India, know full well what colonialism is, all right? And so we know what the occupation of many countries were in years and centuries gone by. And so we know that because of the colonization, that we know that the values of those particular people or countries that were in charge or, quote, had possession of the land, imposed their values, their principles. We can just go to recent memory, for example, under the Soviet Union. Isn't it a prime example of a system, a philosophy, an ideology that imposed its value upon all people of its control. And any land upon which it took over, it imposed that value. And so under communism, you saw the breakdown of the family. You saw the imposition of abortion and divorce, and you saw the whole work ethic, so utilitarianism began to be very close. You saw a whole system of the degradation of the human person. You saw the dehumanization of the human person. You also saw the assault on religion, the practice of faith. All these things became as a consequence of an ideological, philosophical system that imposed its so-called value on not only its own population, but on others. We can look at the same thing under my own system in the United States and capitalism. It has an ideology, it has a philosophy, all right? So you can look at these things and you see what are the values being imposed. An example of that would be with regarding this whole LBGT, all right? LBGTQ, it's indefinite right now. You're talking about 100 different, a couple of hundred different gender names now. It's a slippery slope because there's no end to it. So you can have a person one day, and I'm not, again, making fun of anyone, but the idea that this person one day can think that they're male, tomorrow they're male, a female, the next day they not neither male nor female. You have a person who one day, wakes up and thinks they're both male and female. It's all this confusion that is out there. And what you have is a political system, a very progressive, extreme, radical progressivism that is pushing a radical value. But I hope by now, in the one day we've been together, that you've been paying attention why this ideology is so important. What is it ultimately doing? Dr. Finto hit it on the head. Lower the population. Why? Because people in positions of authority and power want to maintain their positions of authority and power. They want their own financial security, and they don't want to change their lifestyles. So the ultimate thing is, and if you saw this in a document in the United States, promulgated in 1972 under the Kissinger era, under the Nixon era, and it's called the Security Memorandum. It's a document put out by the United States, and it's state policy. So basically it says, we want all the resources of India, but we can't go in with tanks and weapons. So how do we get those resources? Well, we have to take them in a different way. And so what do? We impose values. And we start imposing those values, and one of those values is depopulation. So by depopulating and making you more dependent upon Western nations for resources and so forth, then you become dependent, and we have control of those resources. So an example of that, who uses the most electricity in the world today? So China would be high on the list, right? Who would use the most aluminum in the world? Copper. I'm not going to answer those questions, but you should know that, because this tells you something of why you see such corrupt systems. Now, why is this important? Because it all comes back to the human person. So Planned Parenthood Federation has always imposed or included within its population control the promotion of homosexuality. It makes common sense. You want to depopulate, two people of the same sex can't have children. So why do you think all this whole understanding of gender and transgender and the whole transspeciesism and transhumanism and all the things we're seeing and continuing to see, they make logical sense under that progressive mindset, because it all comes back down to basically allowing the person, most in cases, these situations, to have no children. So you're dealing with a population issue. So this is all part of the conversation that is not being told. And so what's happening is, in order to implement those positions, they have to impose them. And this is what we see. And so in the United States, Canada, especially very radical LGBT agenda, and that you're seeing promulgated. In Canada especially, it's getting stronger by the day and getting more and more difficult as a Canadian to stand against these atrocities against the family. In the United States, we had a family where the father found out that within the school they were teaching a perverse sex education program. By what we mean by this, basically by perverse sex education, it's promoting contraception, abortion, all of the things we're talking about, sexual, freedom, sexual expression, all of these issues. And what happened was the father found out about it, went to the school board. The school board had the father arrested. And basically the state said to the father that your child is going to have to learn what everybody else learns in the state system. Now that's a tremendous, tremendous problem, all right? So this is something that's growing. And because just common sense, all right? Example, one of my staff was in the grocery store back in Front Royal, and his little boy is Colombian. They adopted these two boys that had been abused by their own family, and so it's not two brothers, they're brothers, and so they're in the store, and one of the cashier, all right, is a transgender, whatever, and so but this 7-year-old boy looks up at his dad and says, "What's all this about? Why is this man dressed up like a woman?" A 6-year-old can tell you the truth, all right? All right? It's not Halloween, all right? It's not, it's not a dress-up day. Something's wrong. Now, the father is 6'5", a very big man, and he said, "Okay, son, let's go this way." Because all you know is an incident is going to occur. So this is what we're dealing with. And what's happened is people they're being scared. So an example, in Ireland, I just wrote about this recently in my column, and in Ireland, a Catholic parish in Tullamore, in the Diocese of Meath, on Christmas Day, Christmas Eve, put a very simple phrase on their Facebook page. And it was very beautiful. It was about the family. It was about marriage. It was about children. But one of the things they put was about IVF, and that IVF kills a child, all right? And the whole idea here is just what that message meant. Well, the firestorm occurred, right? And what happened was the Secretary for Health Ministry picked up the fight. And eventually, they took down the site. They should never have taken down the site, right? Because what they said was truth, and it was respectful. It was very respectful. But you see what's happening is they scare people. That's totalitarianism. That's what they're doing today. And this is something that we have to be prepared for. Because I can tell you, it's here in India. I mean, I've been to different parts of India now a number of times. And because of the great blessing, I recently got a 5-year visa to India. So it's going to allow me back in many more times, unless I'm blocked out. But the beautiful thing is I see it with my own eyes. I mean, I'm watching in the community, among people, what's been influential, especially in the main cities, because they take the universities, the colleges, the schools. This is where the propaganda begins. And this is where we see the great push of the LBGT raising this, because we see this in the university. For example, if you as a student, if you were a student, stood up in your classroom and began to address an issue, let's say the teacher makes this comment, and you very logically stand up and disagree, you'll find yourself no longer in the university. All right? So this is how they're doing this, because they're pushing an agenda. Dr. Bryan last night talked about this. You're talking about basically a very small percentile of population, and yet they are controlling the conversation because there is a different agenda. It's an agenda that has nothing to do with their own want for lifestyle. It's those who are in authority above it. How much time we have? Wonderful. Okay, good.